as David just said, hi, I'm Mitu Khandaker, and I'm an independent developer. My one-person studio is called The Tiniest Shark. And today, I'm going to talk very generally about designing mechanics to model social interactions around sort of personal relationships and love. And I'm going to kind of talk about that in the context of the game that I've been working on for the last while called Redshirt, which is a social/life sim game set in space. So today, my talk is titled Designing Love on a Spaceship. Do you see what I did there by putting the space in brackets because we're on a ship? Or maybe Space Station, because Redshirt is set on a space station. The secret subtitle, actually, of this talk is How Do People Work? And the extra secret subtitle is, oh god, no, I really mean, how do people work? What are you all doing here? Why are you looking at me? Okay, anyway, video games. So, Redshirt is a game about a future sci-fi space station where everybody is obsessed with the station's social network called Facebook. So basically, you play as a character who's like a totally insignificant new arrival, and it's a game all about navigating and managing interpersonal politics of work and friendships and romance. And so each time you start a game, the station's populated with lots of randomly generated NPCs. And most of your interactions with them actually happen through this Facebook interface. So you can post status updates, post on other people's walls, you can invite people to hang out, and characters will respond to you differently depending on their opinion of you, which is based on several things, so things like your charisma, your job rank relative to theirs, what mutual friends you have, and things like your common interests. So, for instance, you might want to become friends with someone in a high-ranking position, so you can get a job that's above your station, and they wouldn't want to take you seriously on your own, so you could maybe become friends with someone they know in the hopes that you'll both be invited to the same event or whatever. So you can dazzle them with your charismatic presence. But relationships in Redshirt aren't always platonic. And I kind of wanted to design romance in the game to be as much a part of the fabric, of the game as it is a part of real life. And that means that it doesn't always happen in a very predictable kind of way. But in thinking about that, I kind of had to ask myself what love really is. Because we can tackle the topic of love and sort of romance and relationships in games from a number of different angles. After all, the experience of love is sort of diverse and amazing, and it's very different for different people, yet it's also founded on a few universal truths. And the way that we design games kind of reflects our beliefs about love, so it's kind of important to think carefully about this stuff. So really, what is love and how should we model it? Not like that. And there's a few factors to sort of the way that I ended up sort of thinking about what love, kind of how it works and stuff, and how falling in love works. And so what I did for Redshirt was that anytime that there's a positive sort of increase in your relationship, your platonic relationship with someone, say you like someone's status, or you write on someone's wall or whatever, there's a small random chance that they might become romantically interested in you. And for some NPCs, there's a slightly smaller chance that they'll fall in love with you, even if you're not of their usually preferred gender. And also any negative change in relationship, like if you sort of flirt with lots of other people or whatever, can threaten their romantic interest in you. And some NPCs just have a higher romantic tendency, because some people just get infatuated with people easier than others. And basically, so this is kind of like my theory, I suppose, of how love works, because we can consider all game design to be a theory of how things work. So this is mine, at least so far. And there's kind of all kinds of other ways of doing it that I considered. So originally I looked at sort of the matching algorithms of things like OkCupid, which is about having a match of sort of values. So I sort of considered a mechanic where some of your attributes need to sort of match up within a certain percentage, but it kind of just makes it even harder. And I think that the other thing that you need to be cognizant of is that the player might not really understand how stuff works, which is kind of true to real life. Nobody really understands how love works. And I also sort of thought about having a sort of indicator showing your potential relationship match, but that kind of would have made it feel like a dating site, which isn't what the game is about. And basically, also, I wanted to design love as just being one aspect of the various different types of interpersonal politics in the game. So it's kind of a difficult balancing act. So basically, what I wanted to say is just maybe randomness is the best way, and rolling dice is the best way of thinking about love. Oh, hang on, go back. But, I mean, really what I just wanted to sort of think about was, I mean, I find it really interesting that this whole process really made me just sort of examine my own sort of mental models about how people work and how things work. And hang on, go back to that slide. And obviously, sort of ultimately, all the decisions that I did make were based on my own beliefs about love and people. And so, for example, like the fact that romance is sort of random and spontaneous and a bit hard to understand, that sexuality is set to all by default in the character creator and is still never 100% rigid for most characters, that gender is a slider and even that's an imperfect representation. And obviously in Redshirt, I'm kind of actively trying to model the real-world phenomenon of social interactions and of dealing with love. But really, sort of, the bigger point I wanted to make is that all games are expressive, whether you want them to be or not. The simulations that we build always contain reflections of our own beliefs. Some games reward players for completing challenges without the use of violence, for example, and others punish players for being ill-prepared. And games wouldn't make those kinds of judgments of players' actions if the designers didn't also, on some level, make the same judgments. So basically, it goes without saying that games express a set of beliefs about how things work. And in the case of Redshirt, it's about how relationships and about how people work. But I also wanted to add that this could be about your own beliefs or the belief of how your audience might think, how you believe your audience might think, or how you think your audience might want things to work. And I think that's a really interesting thing to think about because at GDC last year, Mia Consalvo from Concordia University assembled a team of student developers who she balanced for gender and for race and got them to make a social game. And she did that as kind of an experiment in seeing what kind of game such a team could come up with and how they would, and kind of expected them to sort of subvert the status quo. But that actually didn't happen at all. And instead the student team still ended up prioritising making male characters. And this was kind of because they had this set of unquestioned assumptions about what game characters look like, based upon what they already saw in games and kind of what they've grown up with. And so despite not being a totally homogenous team, they still ended up making something which fit the status quo. Basically, what I'm trying to say is no matter who you are, what your background is, remember to always question your assumptions about how people, the world, and how everything work. It can be difficult, but don't take anything for granted. What you think is common sense might just be unquestioned assumptions. And your assumptions, and therefore your games, will always say more about you than you realise. After all, like, who are you assuming your player to be, and why do you think that? And hopefully a result of questioning your own assumptions will be that your games, and indeed your dealings with other people generally, will be more inclusive, and that's a good end goal to have in itself. And if all game systems represent a view of the world, that is the designer's subjective view, why would you want to reinforce everyone else's assumptions? Even the notion of default carries with it a number of culturally mandated assumptions which are themselves transient and subject to subversion. And progressive art is a major component of a progressive society. And like all art, we have an opportunity and a responsibility to contribute to that forward motion. So, what would love, or indeed any kind of human interaction, actually be like in the future, once we've moved past all our bullshit politics of gender, race, and class, and so on? I don't know, but I like to think that Redshirt in part offers a tiny glimpse of that from my own perspective. There was a fantastic profile of Sir Terry Pratchett in The Guardian a couple of weeks ago, in which he said that it's hard to read a lot of science fiction and be a bigot. It'd be awesome if we could say that for playing games, if we can say the same for playing games, whether or not they're about fondly dystopian visions of the future, like in Redshirt. Terry Pratchett also noted that it wasn't an accident that the first interracial kiss on TV happened on Star Trek. As creators of games or any other art form, we play a role in social progress, whether we like it or not. If our work is going to represent our ideals, then shouldn't we strive to represent them, represent the best in ourselves? After all, it was only 40-odd years ago that this moment was a big deal and contradicted a widespread assumption, and it was somehow more transgressive than this. That's kind of an abrupt end to my talk, but yes, yeah, so question your assumptions and push for social progress in games. That's what I have to say.